What's up, Pit Crew? Welcome to the nation. I'm your host, Tim, and today we're talking about getting started with modifying your car. Now, this isn't going to entirely pertain to Q50, Q60, Skyline, whatever you want to call it. The first half of this video, at least, is going to be just general tips for no matter what kind of car you have, what kind of build you're trying to do. So let's get into it. So you're brand new to modding and you're ready to take the plunge. You love the car culture, you love the scene, you love tinkering on your own car, but you really don't know where to start, right? No big deal. Got some easy tips that it's going to help get you started. So our first tip is to know the use of your car, okay? Is this a daily driver for you? You know, do you need it to be reliable and ready to go every single day? Do you take it to and from work? Or is this a true project car that you can actually have sitting in your garage or in a shop for months on end if need be, while you yank out the motor and rebuild it? So that's our first tip. Know how you're going to use the car, because that's going to determine how you approach modding it, okay? So if this is a daily driver for you, okay, you're going to want to focus on reliability. So your modifications, they're gonna be a little bit more mild. You're not going to take it as extreme because you don't wanna have to rip the engine out and rebuild it every 6 months or at the end of every season, versus a track-only car. Well, you have that flexibility. You know, once the race season ends, you've got 3-4 months in between your last race and your next race where you can do whatever you've got to do to it, okay? Now, our second tip, which plays heavily into that first one, is to make a plan, all right? So you need to figure out what kind of direction you want to take this car, okay? Now, if you're like me and you grew up on the Fast and the Furious movies and you absolutely loved them, at least the first 4, I don't really want to talk about the rest. You're seeing a portrayal that's not necessarily accurate, okay? What you're seeing are primarily show cars, especially in the first movie. And some of them had some go fast bits on them. The Supra, for example, that everyone loves, that sucker actually was fast, but it was also a show car prior to it being cast in that movie. The Eclipse that was in that movie, however, was pure show. Mechanically, it was almost entirely stock. Sure, it had a cold air intake, but everything else, all cosmetic. So that's going to help you to figure out how you want to build your car. Do you want a show car where you don't necessarily have to invest money in go fast parts, but you're going to invest a lot of money into the cosmetics? Do you want a drag strip monster where it doesn't have to be pretty at all? It just needs to go 1/8 of a mile or 1/4 of a mile as quickly as possible. Well, then you're putting all your money into go fast parts. Do you want a road course car where your RPMs are going to stay relatively high and you need to be able to pull a lot of G's on some long turns? That's going to affect how you set up your suspension, how you build out the engine. You'll be more worried about higher, horsepower in the higher RPM band. For the Pit Crew Skyline, since it's primarily a autocross car that I treat like a daily driver, I'm less worried about top speed. I'm less worried about keeping the RPMs high. I'm more worried about how many G's can I pull on tight, slow speed corners, and how quickly can I get up to 60 or 80 miles per hour, okay? So for me, and this is just an example, I'm going to do better off with smaller, faster spooling turbos, even though I'm going to end up making less horsepower than a larger, slower spooling turbo that's going to get me through a quarter mile considerably faster, okay? So know your use, make a plan. Next, I suggest you join a club, okay? Now, what I mean by club is you could do a local car club, and that would be great, but I highly recommend that you find a forum for whatever car you're trying to build. And there is a forum for every car, I assure you. And the whole reason why I suggest that is because most of those forums are full of very knowledgeable guys and girls, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of tuner girls out there, and hey, more power to you. But either way, you're going to find a lot of knowledge on those forums. Now, Facebook groups, again, there's a lot of resources there for like takeoff parts and whatnot. And there can be a lot of knowledge there too. But if you've ever been on a Facebook group, you'll know that there's also a lot of trolls and a lot of people who don't truly know what they're doing. And not everyone is an expert. I'm not an expert. You've seen that in my videos already, especially when it comes to hand laying carbon fiber. Not an expert, still trying to learn it. And that's what this channel is all about, trying to learn and grow together. So, join a club, recommend the forums, okay? Next is to research, all right? Especially on those forums, it's going to be invaluable to you, all right? So, once you figure out how you're going to use your car, once you have a plan for it, once you've accessed information through car clubs and forums, you need to research what parts are going to help you with your build and what parts are not going to help you or simply just be a waste of money. So a great example for this car is aftermarket cold air intakes, okay? The stock intakes are actually pretty decent. You can gain a minuscule amount of power using cold air intakes on the stock tune. And by minuscule, I'm talking like 2, 3, maybe 5 horsepower. And almost all of that is because of the filters. So you could save a lot of money just by using a drop-in dry filter as opposed to a full cold-on intake. So do some research and figure out what parts you need to help you meet your goals. From there, you should further your research into the various parts that are available to help you meet those goals. And what I mean by that is, for example, a heat exchanger for the Pit Crew Skyline is going to help me keep the charge air temperatures down so that I get more consistent times throughout the different runs in an autocross event. But there's more than one heat exchanger available out there. So I need to research what heat exchanger is going to be the best fit for me. Are there any real differences between the heat exchangers other than the price and the brand? What are the pros and cons? So a good example of this research that I've done would be, let's take Berger Motorsports for example. They have two heat exchangers for this car. One they brand the Elite, and the other, I forget how they brand it, but it's just their basic heat exchanger, right? Well, in researching them, the difference is the Elite is made in America and it has a nicer finish. That's it. It's a couple $100 more for a nicer finish. So do I need to spend that extra couple $100? Well, if I'm building a show car, yeah, I do. But if I'm building an autocross car, no, I don't. So that's a good example of the kind of research that you need to do, which rolls into our final point: make a budget, all right? This hobby can be a complete and total time and money sinkhole, all right? I have built a lot of vehicles throughout my life. You know, I've been modifying cars since my very first one over 20 years ago. Let me tell you, I have wasted a lot of money, all right? And I don't want you to make those same mistakes. And I imagine a lot of you have. It's pretty common, okay? So what I would recommend when you make your budget, let me back up. When you research, write down the parts that are going to help you meet your goals, write down the parts that you want, and write down the prices that you find for them. Go ahead and do like 2 columns, like the most expensive one you found and the cheapest one you found, right? Add up those columns, find out how much they are, like your high-end, most expensive parts you find. Let's say you find $30,000 worth of goodies that you want. And on the cheap end, well, it's all the same parts, it's just the more budget-friendly pricing, and it comes up to $28,000, all right? It's gonna be a small difference, but there will be a difference, and sometimes that's all it takes. All right, so you've got your research done, you've got your columns with your grand totals done, you're in the budget phase now, okay? Now you need to really sober yourself, and you need to decide, can I afford this $30,000 worth of mods, this $28,000 worth of mods, whatever the case may be? Can I justify spending this kind of money on a car that is just constantly losing value? And where can I trim the fat? Okay, so let's say, just to keep things simple, since I've already done a lot of research on this, let's say you're building an autocross car and it just happens to be a Skyline slash Q50 or Q60, and you're looking at suspension. You want to lower the ride height, and well, we'll use my plans specifically. For example, I want to lower this car about 1 inch, okay? I don't want to go any lower than that because, again, I treat this car like a daily driver. So I want to be able to go out on public roads without worrying about ripping off my front bumper at every speed bump or bottoming out on every pothole, right? Or, God forbid, high centering in a slight crest in the road. So a 1 inch drop is going to do it for me. Well, I've got 3 general options. I can do lowering springs, which is the most budget friendly. I can do coilovers, which is the most performance oriented, or I can do airbags, which is really, really nice because you can change the ride height on the fly, so you can lower more than 1 inch, and whenever you go out on a rough road, just bump it up a little bit as you go. No big deal. And price-wise, they are as I mentioned them. You've got, your lowering springs, which is going to be a couple $100. You've got coilovers, which is going to be, $1,500, $2,000. And then you've got the air ride system, which is going to be $3,000, $5,000, depending on what brand, what bells and whistles. It can just go up and up. So for my build, my research has led me to coilovers because, again, I'm only dropping the car 1 inch. So I could get away with lowering springs. But, again, going back to knowing my use, treating this car like a daily driver, lowering springs are going to compress your stock shocks that additional inch that I want to lower it, and it's going to keep them compressed that way. That's not terrible for the shocks, but it will wear them out faster than it should. On top of that, you're going to have a little bit more resistance to bound and rebound because you're not getting the full travel. You're not getting full expansion. You're only getting full compression. So for my purposes, I am going with coilovers. Now, that's not where the suspension expense ends, because even though I'm only lowering 1 inch, it's still changing the geometry of the suspension components. So that's another thing. That's where going right back up to research and the forums, you have to learn all these things. You have to learn, okay, if I change this part, what does it do to the car in general, okay? When lowering a car, even by only 1 inch, you're changing the geometry, the angles of the rest of the suspension, all right? So when you do that, now you need to start looking at your A-arms, your control arms. You need to start looking at, okay, is the drop I want too aggressive for the spindles, the axles? You need to consider, how's this going to affect my camber? How's this going to affect my toe? How's this going to affect my caster? Anytime you make any change to the suspension, even tires, you need to get in alignment, all right? And a car, just like your body, is a system. You cannot change one thing without affecting a whole bunch of other things, all right? So, knowing all this, knowing that I'm going with coilovers, now I can look at my coilover column and I can be like, okay, the most expensive I've found is like $3,500, we'll say, and the cheapest I found is like $800, all right? Going back to know your use, treating this car like a daily driver, those cheap coilovers, they're probably not going to last. I want this car dependable. I want to be able to jump in it and go at any time. I don't want the cheap coilovers. Going back to the budget, I can't afford the most expensive coilovers. So I need to find something that's somewhere in the middle. And then we go right back to research. So you can see how all the steps in this, in these tips, really interlink and they play off of each other. So I highly recommend that you grab a notepad, some loose leaf paper, what have you, and actually write all this stuff down. At the top, go ahead and do a sentence or two on how you're going to use your car. Right below that, do a sentence or two on how you want to use your car, your plan, how you're going to build it. Bookmark the forum that you've joined or what have you. And then, of course, below all that, write out the parts that are going to help you meet your goals and how much they cost to the side of that. And then underneath that, do your budget. Now, another point on the budget. If you have not chosen a car yet, okay? So you've never modded a vehicle before, you want to mod a vehicle, either you don't have a vehicle or you're planning on a project car, not your daily driver, then that actually gives you a lot of opportunity. You can really help yourself out by picking an appropriate platform. So for an autocross build, you could arguably the most appropriate platform, the best one to start with, is the Mazda Miata. Now you can argue that a GR86, BRZ Twin, that they're just as good, and well, maybe the new ones are. I haven't researched them enough to really tell you. I have seen one at the autocross events, and he does do pretty darn good, but he doesn't really compete with the Miatas that are there. Now, maybe that's because it's a brand new car and he's taking it a little bit easy. Maybe he's afraid of the RTV sealant issue that those engines seem to be having at the moment. I'm not sure, I couldn't tell you. But what I can tell you is for whatever build you're doing, there's going to be 2 or 3 different cars that are really going to stand out head and shoulders for that type of scenario. The Honda S2000, for example, very, very good autocross car. Its issue is it doesn't really make power until about 5,000 RPM, much like a rotary engine. So you really got to keep that RPM band high, which then leads you into, okay, well, if I have to keep the RPM band high to do what I want to do with this car, I need a manual transmission so that I can keep the RPMs high and I'm not trying to fight a computer, okay? So you can see how, again, all these tips, they feed into each other, they're all related. But getting back on point, if you don't have your car yet, or you're doing a project car, what have you, do even more research and pick a platform that's going to get you where you want to go, all right? So, with all that said and out of the way, there's one more thing that I do have to mention, and it's more of a disclaimer, and that is know your laws and ordinances, okay? There's some states are more modification friendly than others. And I think we all know what I'm talking about here, okay? California is really, really cracking down on ECU tunes. And a lot of places are really cracking down on loud exhausts. And all of this has absolutely everything to do with the ridiculous and irresponsible phenomenon that is intersection takeovers. Do not take part of intersection takeovers. It's not worth it. Your car can be seized and sold even if you still owe on it. That's in California and even here in Texas. If I go street racing, and I don't, if I did, and I get caught, Texas will impound my car. I won't get it back because they're either going to sell it or they're going to crush it. So if the cops take my car, every single dime that I've put into it is gone. I can't really afford that. Can you? I doubt it. Who can? I mean, maybe Bill Gates, he could probably afford to have a car impounded every other day and whatever. New McLaren, right? But regardless, because a certain small portion of the car culture population is being reckless and irresponsible, the laws are cracking down on everybody, all right? So it is on you to know and follow your local laws and ordinances. All right, so that's gonna do it for this video. I wanna thank you for watching. Hit that like and subscribe if you liked this video, if you learned something today. Make sure that you share this video with anyone that you know that is just getting started out with modifications and they don't really know where to go, or even someone who's modified a car before. They still may not necessarily be thinking the project through. It took me a lot of years and a lot of wasted money to actually come up with these 5 tips. So a lot of times we like to just jump headfirst into projects and it can lead to disaster, obviously. So be sure to share this video. Leave a comment. Let's get a conversation going. Until next time, keep it safe, keep it on the track.